But I too want to thank the principals, directors. I'm not going to go by names, but principals and directors, thank you for being here. You work very long days, and I tend to be cautious of your evening time. The board hasn't noticed it, but I think for the two topics tonight, it's important you're here to help the board come to an understanding of both the budget at this point as well as the mid-year update. So in terms of COVID, we actually have some good news. The data you're seeing nationally is playing out, certainly here. Whoops, you all right? Playing out here in Westchester County. As most remember, ICU at the end of the day, what started with George Latimer, virtual, and his team. But the numbers of active cases have dropped to 3,000. You may recall just a month ago it was at 36,000, the active cases, so it is dramatically down. Hospitalization and fatalities are also dropping, so we are where we hoped in terms of, as you've heard, this incredible spike and coming down the other side. The superintendents in this region, and I wish I could be as smart as the rest of them, but they not only run districts well, but they're incredible activists to the point where a couple of them become very well known to the governor's team, I've heard, over this weekend, advocating for a topic I'll get into in a second. And indeed, I'll share with the whole board, two districts have come together, Rye and Harrison, with Eric Byrne and Lou Wall behind it to create an advocacy campaign with the governor on the following, which is, can we have a sensible way to not have masks? But let's be sensible, not political about it. And that started before we learned what New Jersey is going to do in March, and where I live, Connecticut, we think the governor there is about to make an announcement regarding masks. And now I heard exactly what the governor of New Jersey said. We know it's an early March date, but everybody's hoping for, and I don't like using the phrase, but I'm using it, an off-ramp, meaning in terms of metrics and other guidance, why is it we're not wearing masks? So make it be as much scientific as possible and not political. So the superintendents in this region have been writing to that effect with the governor and the governor's team quite actively the last couple of weeks, enough so there were some conversations this weekend that involved the governor's staff quite directly with some of the representatives of the supers in this region. But again, to make it really clear, it's that we as educators, we value masks right now because it's important, but we value getting them off. But let's get them off in a very thoughtful, smart way. As many of you know, I'm able to get in classrooms a lot. I go in and guest read. I guest read with this on, and it's doable. I think I would say right now, those who are very concerned about masks, it's more of an adult issue than a student issue. But again, hear me. We as educators in this room, we want to be safe, and that's masks now. We also want them off, but them off at the right time. I think I repeated myself enough on that. So let me come to a couple other things, because masks coming off, nothing simple. If masks come off without understanding what it means for quarantines, we could actually see quarantines go back up. Because right now, and as Amy can say, one of the main reasons that we don't vaccinate, that we don't quarantine for those who aren't vaccinated is if they are masked up and at a certain distance away. So if the mask mandate comes off, without an attention to the quarantine issues or distance and all the rest, physical distancing, we could go backwards on that. So that's something we're very concerned about as superintendents. And secondly, just as an example, if people who get COVID come back after the 5 days, what's required of them? Do they have to have masks on or not for that remaining 5 days on the 10-day period? So these are things that are getting paid attention to. But very much right now in New York State, we're paying attention to New Jersey and to Connecticut as well to see what we can find out. Very important on this, and I've had a lot of conversations with the administrators here and others, with Nate Morgan on behalf of the teachers, is if the mandate goes away, what does Hastings do? Well, the decision probably would be before the board. What I'm sensing from across the region is if the mandate goes away, there's increasing willingness, or lack of willingness to go into a mandate at the local level. And that's primarily because who determines the metrics that when masks come off? Because if you're going to mandate, it's not forever, right? We don't want to be wearing these things forever. So is that going to be up to local boards of ed to determine the metric at which point these come off? So even in the last week, I've seen it swing from if the state takes back the mandate, takes it off, that we may be into, and I'm not saying what Hastings would do, but we may be into an optional approach, heavily encouraging the wearing of masks. And also the time of year that this occurs will affect things, meaning it may be mid-March as we're seeing. But that's a general sense. We can talk more about that as you'd like. Last thing, it is a technicality but important. On Friday evening, it's amazing when you learn these things, at 10:30 Friday evening, learned that the New York State Department of Health had given more flexibility for those students age eligible but not boosted. Up until that point, if you did not have the booster or age eligible and you had to quarantine, you come back to school under tested stay, but you cannot participate in your extracurriculars. They modified that to say you can participate in your extracurriculars, but not in a competition, meaning just within your own district. So the upside to that is, and it's particularly around athletes, frankly, athletes could practice with their teams, but just can't go compete against other teams for those 5 days. Very, very important. Hastings has been a very healthy place, and we're even more healthy. We put out the daily data Thursday, because we were in an ice storm Friday. Thursday, the data went out. I think we had 1 case. Today, the data went out. We had 5 cases across 4 days. So we're doing a very good job here. And I thank the families, I thank the staff for that. So that's the COVID update. Let me swing to some good news. First, I thank the principals. I'm going to do it again. Thank the directors for being here. Second, I'm going to go from the oldest in the district to the youngest. I just went from the oldest. You're the oldest, sorry. Second would be the Hastings High School's National Honor Society, connected with underprivileged children in Cameroon through their artwork in cooperation with a nonprofit group, the Memory Project. So students were paired with a child in Cameroon and created handmade portraits with a child to keep. Second update, I'm told that our 7th and 8th grade 1 acts are set to be held this Friday. Is that correct? Yes, great. I'm glad I have the correct information here. That's a 1 act. Did you notice that? The 6th graders at also that school with the 7th and 8th graders read to Hillside Elementary School students as part of their expressive reading class. And was that a good job? Yes? Thumbs up? For those on the TV, I'm looking at the 2 principals of those wonderful schools. So that was a plus, Amy and Jennifer? Okay, great. Then the Hillside Elementary School 4th grade safety patrol, who I do witness at least once a week. I'll be back out there, I think, tomorrow. But are holding a coat drive for those in need through the local nonprofit Family to Family. And donations are being accepted until the 18th of this month. Do I have that correct, Amy? Okay. And again, it's a wonderful sense of the giving back that just characterizes Hastings in so many ways. Lastly, as a sort of tease for the board, I met this past week with Melissa Chandroff to talk about the science research program. I've been learning more about it, and I've been unabashedly celebrating it, which it deserves. So Melissa and I talked about the fact that, do you bring forward to the board some of your great budding scholars? And she said, yes, we've always done that, and certainly the competition winners. So I suggested, and I have to run it by the board, would be willing to find some time at a May or June meeting to hear from more of the students. Because as I learned the topics just this year, food allergies, economics, wetlands, ornithology, animal behavior, music and dementia, looking at that relationship, and Gus, you may be able to tell us some more about the program, but I thought if we can find an efficient way to bring more of those scholars forward, that would be fantastic, because it's a rigorous 2-year program, as I understand, and that's a lot of work, and the level of work is impressive, and I think it's a powerful symbol for Hastings and the great work that's going on here. Melissa quickly agreed, so now it's up to the board to agree with Melissa Chandroff, and we will find a way in May or June to do that. Great. So let me turn to Melissa Szymanski, who will give an update, the final one, before we shift to the other work tonight.
All right, so last week we hosted Racial Equity Week throughout the district. And each building designed a day that provided opportunities for students to consider at developmentally appropriate age and grade levels how racial equity affects our world. The days were designed by committee with input from diverse stakeholders, including the administrators, teachers, students, staff, and community members. And I'd like to thank Dr. Janice Mateo Toledo for her leadership in the planning process and in bringing these programs to fruition. At the high school, the theme was environmental justice, think locally, act locally. Students engaged around environmental justice issues that are currently impacting the county, especially lower income communities and low income members of wealthier communities. The Sacrifice Zone, which is a 30-minute film, was shown, and that was followed by guest speakers associated with the film who answered questions and provided some context to the film. Educators then led classroom discussions, activities, and action-oriented workshops. And the part that I caught following the film with the panelists, they were talking a lot about, almost the screening behind the screening, what was actually happening to them as they were filming the piece, which was quite interesting, and that's not reflected in the film, so that was really quite interesting. Farragut Middle School. The theme at Farragut Middle School centered on understanding the ubiquity of media in our daily lives and its impact on race equity and social justice. Students participated in various learning activities throughout the day and listened to a panel discussion on representation and the media. And then at the elementary school, the theme was Never Too Young for Justice, and City Love led an engaging, developmentally appropriate assembly to build community across our differences, talk about race, hope, equity, and belonging. The speakers were funded through the HEF Speaker Series grant, so thank you to HEF for the speakers, and the movie viewing was funded by the Race Matters Committee, so thank you to Race Matters.
Maureen, are you going to wait do you have something to go through now?
Just a really quick update on the work around the district. So the Music Suite did open, I think, since our last board meeting, and the students and the teachers are able now to use the space. We are still waiting on the remainder of the furnishings to come in, so once that's in place, we'll have some type of real grand opening for the space, but there was no need to continue to hold them out of that space. Just wanted to point out at Hillside, we're currently working with the village leadership and some local landscape architects in ways that we can still consider making some changes to the, there's a roadway and some of the walkways at Hillside that would be better for like flooding and things like that. So there will be a proposal that the board that will be recommending to approve just some modification of some of the original plans at Hillside. We had considered them earlier in the construction, but we wanted to see where we were with funding at this point prior to making those, putting those forward, as some of them are more costly than what we had initially contemplated. But, we've been having conversations. I know Dr. McCursey's been speaking to the mayor, and we just wanted to, for anyone who's interested, just to, say that with the rain, I think there was some concerns just about, water in general, and some of these improvements will help, with some of the water that comes off of the Hillside property. So that's it, and then I guess we'll go right into the budget.
We got just two more things
Oh,
first.
sorry. Oh, that's right. You have student report.
Sabine and Gus, student report?
Good evening, everyone. The band and orchestra had their first rehearsals in the newly renovated Music Suite. I'm definitely excited about the new storage space in the facility. The space will be more organized. Each student gets an assigned locker for their instrument. The band also started rehearsing a piece last week that was composed by Jasper Zimmerman, who is a Hastings High School student. The language department has an interest meeting tomorrow after school to introduce the process of earning New York State's Seal of Biliteracy. While only seniors can begin the process, juniors are welcome to attend tomorrow's meeting. Both the girls and boys basketball teams are finishing the regular season with very impressive records. Best of luck to those teams in the upcoming playoffs.
So the track team had its last regular season meet this weekend, and times were great all around, with Ben McNulty, who's a senior, stole the show. He broke the 55 hurdles record for the school, which is super impressive. We've also got a couple runners who are going to state qualifiers. That's Emmett McGrath, Pat Maloney, Celia Silverstein, Anna Thomas, and Noah Engoff. And Celia's actually just was talking with the coaches at Carleton College in Minnesota, and she's officially going to be running on their track team.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so as Dr. McCursey was talking about, there was also JSHS this weekend, which is the Junior Science and Humanities Symposium. So it's one of the big competitions that the science research program does. And it was fully virtual because of COVID and was a little bit rocky from what I've heard. People had trouble with breakout rooms, and it was took longer than it was supposed to. But it definitely, I'm sure people did awesome. The award ceremony is actually going to be held tonight, so we'll definitely be back in 2 weeks with updates about how everyone did, but I'm sure it was awesome. As far as sports, the wrestling team just finished their season. They did super well, so congratulations to them. As far as COVID, from our perspective, anxiety seems to be pretty down. With very few cases, it feels like less of a presence. And I think people are kind of looking forward to the summer, to spring sports, and the idea of being outside with those masks down, and hopefully maybe even in school, as you're talking about, Dr. McCursey. So just before we finish off, I just want to talk a little bit about Project Share, because it was our first midnight run in the last 2 months. Because of COVID in January, we weren't comfortable going down there. But we delivered about 300 meals and clothing and toiletries to homeless folks on the Upper West Side. There's just this cool story that happened over the weekend that I thought would be good to share with you guys, because it just shows how special it is and what a great, program and what it's doing for the kids in high school. So we were at the stop on right by Central Park, and there's this man who's homeless that clearly couldn't speak English and spoke Spanish, and Oscar Hayes, who's a sophomore, went up to him and started talking Spanish. He doesn't speak Spanish at home, but from Senor Lopez's classes, he's pretty comfortable. Senor Lopez is awesome, and he started having a conversation with him. And it turned out that the guy was from Peru, which is where Oscar had spent 6 weeks over the last summer doing the language and service program. So they ended up having a really special conversation. It was just kind of a nice little moment that I think really encapsulates like the kind of relationships, positive impact that all these people at Hastings are having, doing stuff with Project Share. So yeah, that's it.
Super. That's great.
Thanks for the update, guys. I just appreciate the level of information you provide us in the real window, very quickly and focused. It's really helpful every other week, so thank you for that. Okay, public comment. So does anyone have public comment?
The first one for the, on the agenda, right? Is that one is the general one?
Yeah, well, we'll let you.
Yeah.
Well,
Up here?
yeah. Please.
Okay.
We'll give you
let's
mine.
Grab Gus's, microphone.
So my name is Jody Meyer, 15 Forest Ave, from Hastings, and it's wonderful to be here and to see so many partial, warm and familiar faces. I was thinking, sitting here, first of all, I want to thank the students. That was a great report, and what a great story to bring to the board. I mean, really, it's fantastic, both of you. So I didn't come here to listen to the budget presentation. One of those things I get to zone out on. But I thought maybe I would tell you that I was going to run for the board again. But I'm not. I'd rather be grandmothering. So, but what I did want to tell you is that I really miss you guys a lot. I love being a part of this group, and it was so much a part of my life for so long. And I love this year watching you from afar and watching how you've worked. And I give you so much credit. It is beyond difficult, and it's just very impressive. And I want to give a special thanks to the old board members for your time and your dedication and for hanging in there. I know how hard it is. And I haven't written letters to you because I haven't wanted to bombard your mailboxes, because I know what that's like. And to the new board members, I want to just give you a special welcome and hope that you are able to allow yourselves to take and learn from the old board members, You don't have to always agree with them, but they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom, and I think it's really important if you can take advantage of that. One of the special thrills that I've had this year is watching how you, Bill, have become a part of the district. And I so commend the board on being able to work together with Bill. And I cannot tell you how delighted I was when I saw the email, and I didn't have any inside information. I've really stayed away from inside information since I left the board, that they were going to offer you a contract to extend. I think many of you know that I'm a big sports fan, and I love signing people in their rookie years if they look like they're going to be all-stars. So that really meant a lot. And I want to say that I love reading your messages every week. I am blown away by them. They highlight to me communication. I feel like your communication is incredible. It feels, to an outsider, very transparent, and I think you have modeled for us what it means to be a transparent communicator. I really understand why people in the district, faculty and administrators, have felt like they have loved working with you, and that it's a bit of maybe a breath of fresh air or just a relief. But I think that I just see how you've brought such leadership to the organization, and it's a relief to me as someone who's no longer so involved to know that there's somebody like you at the helm working together with the board. And I think I so applaud your leadership, but what also comes to my mind is how much I think you've been a healer. And I think that's something that we have all longed for and needed for a while, for a long while. I'm not just talking about our most recent superintendent or anyone in particular. I just think process-wise, organization-wise, it's something we've needed, and you have so stepped into that role. And I'm delighted that you've agreed to stay on, and they've extended your contract. Now, maybe I particularly liked this last week's letter. I actually sent it to my son, who's in education. I told him I thought it was a great example of communication, but also because I thought he'd like to read about the Hastings basketball team, which, of course, people here, many of you know, is very near and dear to my heart. And that the two seniors are both people who played rec basketball, as did Sabine, right? And so that sort of really stuck out. But anyway, I just want to say welcome. I love you all. I miss you. I still love Hastings, and I hope, Bill, I'm assuming that you're beginning to get a feel, if you haven't, for what a jewel of a community this is. Obviously, we have our warts and we have our pimples, and that's real life. But I think that this is an incredibly special place, and I'm glad that you're able to start to call it home and that we can welcome you to our home. So I love you all. I miss you tremendously. And life does go on, but it's not always so easy. And hopefully someday we'll all get to be able to hug and kiss without stupid masks on. And I just brought you all a little Valentine's. Pass around and share.
Start it here.
Thank you, Jody. Miss you, Jody. Miss you.
Thank you, Jody. That was very nice.
You can vote on anything tonight.
Exactly.
Let's go 4-4. No, you and I don't know.
Oh, my goodness. Those are beautiful.
It's chocolates that say love on them.
I think we should
I think
start it
only
with
board
Bill,
members who
I
have
think.
no questions should get chocolate.
With no questions.
If you take one, you're guaranteed no questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, if all public comment could be like that, bringing chocolates.
Yeah, right? It is on tape.
No, I think it's people about worry when they come up with something. What are you going to make public comment about?
Okay, so now we're on to the budget presentation.
They didn't take. Oh,
Good night.
I'm still, I have the
Good
chocolate.
night.
We'll just pass it back this way, thank you. Bill, did you want to start? You were going to.
Yeah. Jody, thank you, because you were part of some conversations before you step down that were highly influential to my thinking. So you were part of the reason that somebody said, I'm thanking you.
I can't hear anything that you want.
Well, I want to thank you personally and professionally because you were on an interview group back last spring, and you answered questions in ways that hooked me. So thank you. So in terms of the budget, bringing budgets together is one of the wonderful challenges, and I use those two words purposely, one of the wonderful challenges that administrators do. And it's, yes, there's a core team at the top, but it's representing the whole leadership team, some of whom are here, worked very, very hard on this. And I've been fortunate to work in very well-resourced places my entire career, and there the budgets are even harder because there's both the sense of being very well-resourced, then the perceptions of being well-resourced, and particularly on the public side, as I've been the last 10 years, in communities that value high-quality education, excellent professionals, excellent facilities, excellent programs, particularly in the public sector where we have to embrace special education. Remember, I worked in the parochial and Catholic school world and the private school world, and I'm going to say it, they do not have to embrace special education. Some of the finest special education schools are independent, but public schools do not have to embrace special education. We have to embrace it. It's an ethical and moral imperative. And it does bring with it then some other challenges for us to think about in terms of resources, but that's the wonderful side of that challenge. So as we go into this process here in Hastings, we are a very well-resourced place, but we also are a place where each resident cares deeply that we're maximizing each of the dollars they provide. And here, as again, where I've been before, particularly the last two stops, Weston and Greenwich, it's substantially the homeowner, substantially the resident that is carrying the weight for us financially. And so as you'll hear, as you've always heard before, but you're going to really hear, it's a balancing act for how do we expand, accelerate the great quality of programming we have here, the facilities and all those resources we need to provide for students, and balance that against what are real concerns of any resident as to the tax level. Now, this state helps by putting limits, less so than the state I just came from, but they're also, they're natural limits just because of being respectful of those who provide the resources. So we brought to you a budget. I think it's a very good budget. I think it balances those sets of interests I've just laid out. Maureen's going to walk us through it somewhat in a very familiar way to what the returning board members are used to. This is the first part. You're going to get the entire budget, all of the totals, and then it digs into the non-instructional side. And as Maureen will say, we will be back to you in several weeks with the instructional side. To put it metaphorically, I'd rather have you drink from several glasses of water than try and drink the entire thing at once and be able to pace out what you're hearing and seeing. We are willing to talk with you as much as you need as a board to answer all the questions. That's one reason you've got the principals and directors here tonight. But tonight will be at least the first look, and then we'll just keep digging into it as much as you need us to dig into it. But in sum, please see that we're striving to have a budget that advances quality, high quality work for all of our students, and balancing that with what are the realities for residents in Hastings and what they can provide financially. Maureen?
Yes.
Lori, before you start off, I think the current budget is posted in executive content. There's some people that were just texting that in the public that wondered, did we want to put it in the?
Yeah, sure, it can be.
So you can
yeah,
put
you
it
can move it up.
public.
Yeah. Okay.
There was the one though that's in private has a last slide that says we'll be adding a few.
Yeah, I'm gonna because
Is
just
this-
with the timing tonight, I
So you don't
decided
have-
to
there's
move
nothing-
those.
There's not a
No.
separate. There's not a
No.
different one you want to put in public than this one.
So no,
Is this-
because
That's the
that's
final?
it. That's the one
That is
because
still
when I
this-
spoke to them,
got
I
it.
had a few, but then I decided because I was thinking it was in public, so that's why I decided not to put them in there. But
Okay.
now just like meaning during the day, I thought it went public.
Okay.
So
So it's okay to
Yep.
make that executive content
Exactly,
public?
yep,
Okay.
and then we'll just like,
Great.
drop that slide later
Okay.
for the permanent record. Okay, so just now I can start? Okay. Yes, so as Bill said, this is our first opportunity to kind of share what we've been actually working on for quite some time. I've said this before, the budget really is a 12-month process, at least for me, and it is a constant. Not only are we constantly looking at what's coming a year ahead, but we're also looking at the impacts of our budget for 5 years as what helps us to kind of make decisions and understand what we have coming down the road. And as we are considering the upcoming budget, it is always good to be thinking a multi-year. So this evening, we're going to, different years we've presented it differently, where we've shown an overview of the entire budget. This is how we did it for many years traditionally, and a lot of districts choose to do it this way, where they show the non-instructional portion of the budget first. And although there may be plenty of questions around that, because the instructional budget is the largest component of our budget, we felt it better to kind of dedicate a couple sessions exclusively to that. And then for this evening, we can kind of go through this. And then if there's any follow-ups, we could also come back to the next time, the next meeting in February. So for tonight, I'm sorry, this is not working? Patrick, I don't know if this is working. Yes, I could just I can go up there and do it.
Is it this one here?
Hooked it up to the clapper.
Oh, is there, maybe it's a different
Sometimes it
clicker.
works.
Do you have a Fonzie move too?
And that's it. Oh, there we
Hit
go.
the side,
Okay,
right?
perfect.
Hit it on the side.
So just to kind of provide an overview of tonight's meeting, we are going to share and just update you. The board had previously adopted the budget calendar that has some dates that are legally required and then some of our own internal dates in terms of when we're presenting different parts of the budget. We'll just review some of the budget goals that really help us when we're focusing on how we prioritize different aspects of our budget. We'll be providing a budget summary, which really just shows how our entire spending plan, what we're proposing right now. And then again, we're going to go into more detail on those non-instructional areas. We'll just kind of touch upon some of the major factors impacting the budget, as well as review the tax cap and some of the funding challenges that all schools face. So just again, as a reminder, we do have another meeting at the end of February, and at that time, if there are some additional details based upon tonight's discussion we can provide, that kind of gives us the ability to come back to you. But then the plan would be on March 7th to really dedicate a large chunk of time in breaking down that instructional budget. And then the later meeting in March also will be continuing with that discussion. And then, as you can see, these are just kind of key dates that are there. There's some other dates in between where by April 1st, by that point, we'll have a final budget that will be shared online with the community, and that's our actual budget book document. All of the presentations we do up until that time, of course, will be online as well. And then April 19th, which is a legally required date, which has to occur a certain amount of time before the budget hearing, the board will be asked to adopt the budget. And then on May 4th is a budget hearing. And again, this is a legal requirement, which happens 2 weeks prior to the actual district-wide budget vote. And that also allows another opportunity, which it's kind of interesting because that is a state-required date, but it kind of falls after the board already adopts the budget, which is always a little bit interesting in terms of timing. But it does then allow, we would be starting a budget hearing prior to our regular board meeting to allow folks to come in and speak specifically about the budget. And then again, March 17th, budget vote and school board election. As we approach, again, each budget, we are reminded, and we've spoke about this before, that a budget really is an articulation of the goals of the district and the priorities. So as we just kind of have a couple key points, obviously there's more than that's listed here, but we always look to strengthen Hastings high-quality education for all students. We want to maintain our core programs and resources. We are always looking to create opportunities for all students to access higher level and rigorous courses. We want to make sure we're providing professional learning for all personnel, again, investing in facilities and and then also to try to be fiscally responsible, manage a school budget within the tax cap levy. Purpose of the budget. The budget really embodies the beliefs, values, and aspirations of the community for all children, ensures that the district has resources to educate all students. It motivates the system to be strategic in planning and action, and it aligns fiscal planning with long-term initiatives. And that's when, and we'll be talking about this at a future meeting, just looking at our 5-year fiscal planning and the alignment to some initiatives we may be thinking about. But then there's the budget realities, which is the other piece of the equation, which is enrollment changes can be beyond what our trend data is, which then requires us to, change some of our thinking to address class sizes. Special education, Dr. Bokersi had mentioned it earlier, it is a challenge for all districts because the needs of the children really drive the expenses in that area of the budget. And they're really based, as you can see on a few bullet points, we included here the complexity of an individual student's needs, out of district tuition, if that's the best place for a student to learn, new enrollment that is always unknown over the course of the year. We have many new students entering the system. And again, although we're very grateful to all of our legislators and our governor for making good on the increase in the promise of what was due to us in state aid, even with that, what I would call a significant increase that we'll review shortly, our expenses continue to outpace our revenues because state aid is a smaller portion of our total revenue package where our homeowners, and that's the last bullet there, the tax burden is mainly on our homeowners, which is similar to a lot of our neighboring districts, and due to that, it does, put a lot of the burden, the tax burden on them. So that's always something we need to balance as we're putting together our budget. Just as a reminder, major drivers of expenses, this is a slide we just put every year, and as we present the budget, we'll dig into these a bit more, that these are the major things that even when we're just starting our budget and looking at our forecast for next year, we have our contractual obligations. 80% of our budget, or probably a little bit more at this point, is just for staff salaries and benefits, much of which are already, just part of our rollover budget. We then have our programs, pension costs, health insurance increases, enrollment in class size, capital projects, and debt. And again, those are those investments in our facilities. And this is just to this sort of demonstrates what I had spoken about on the earlier slide. When we start looking at our budget, these are some things before we even contemplate either something we may want to add, like a new program or new electives or some of those, a new sports program. These are things as we rolled into next year's budget that when we started to roll our expenses, and some of it, again, is related to different students' needs. When we rolled our existing or projected staff between salary, contractual increases, services and tuition for students with disabilities, legal expenses. Again, these are just highlights to some of the larger drivers. Technology, infrastructure, and devices, the cost that's passed along to us from our local BOCES, which the cost of services, retirement costs, health insurance, which actually was very low this year, actually, utilities and service contracts, and our debt service. So as we will go over tonight, this is the first year where we're seeing that new debt for the $18.3 million bond that we issued a few years back. The good news is that all the work will be completed before we begin to really meaningfully pay for it. But this particular year, a big chunk of that $3.5 million is, in fact, that first debt payment coming online. So that's why we were, although even if you take that out, you can kind of see how the expenses year over year are, go up a significant amount.
Maureen,
Yep.
just quick, is there a time where you're going to show a chart that kind of shows the breakdown of that 3.5
Yeah,
dollars in percentage?
Yes, so I think we will be kind of wrapping back to, we'll be constantly kind of reminding people of the drivers of the budget. Tonight, we'll speak specifically, and we'll be able to kind of demonstrate the areas of the non-instructional budget and the dollars associated with the increases there. And then as we go into our next budget presentation, we'll start to really then remind people, and you can kind of, because even when I go through the budget, I'm like, wow, it adds up relatively quickly, so we'll definitely break that down in a little bit more detail as we present. So again, how do we kind of then, as we're working through the budget, how do we balance that budget? So this is a process, and as Bill had mentioned, it's something that we do with the team. Of course, the teachers and many of the chair people are involved with providing, either their budgets into the building level people, and then we kind of look and try to create a spending plan. So we look to emphasize student learning, maintain commitment to initiatives. We try to focus, again, because fiscal sustainability, occasionally you can afford something, like as an example, this year we had a lot of federal monies, meaning this fiscal year coming in, and it was wonderful, and we were very happy to take that money. But I think, as many of those who are on the board last year, we really struggled with, being careful not to either overcommit to like creating a bunch of new positions with that money, because then it may be a year or two from now, we would find ourselves in a pickle. So, we're always looking at, as we add something to the budget, we want to be able to add it comfortably, understanding that in the, the years coming beyond that next year, that we'll be able to sustain it. We consider efficiencies. Again, anytime either there's a person retiring or any type of opportunity to kind of look at staffing, programming, personnel, things change occasionally, things that you may need one year, you may not need the next. We do look at all these areas, even if they're relatively minor expense areas, we do review them for each department to ensure that we're not over budgeting or we no longer need it. Okay, so budget components. This is just more of just kind of providing some definitions of as we speak about these four categories. The four major components of a budget, those are definitions that are required by the state, how they group expenses. So they're put into four kind of larger buckets. General support, you see under that heading what's included in that category. And those are some of the areas we're going to be reviewing this evening, because that's considered a non-instructional expense. Obviously, the instructional part of the budget, which has all those titles there that you can clearly see. Transportation, again, interestingly, the last two, I would argue, all of them really do have to do with instruction, although this is, again, the way we're required to break down our budget. Transportation is a direct service for children, so it's just interesting that it is considered non-instructional. And then undistributed, and other than the debt, that category includes all our employee benefits, which, again, are tied to individuals who are either being paid through the instruction. But that is how we're going to present it, because that is, in fact, how we're required to break down our budget. Okay, so budget overview. So again, we provide this each year. I know it's a little bit hard to see there on that screen. And this is really, again, as I mentioned, there's four categories in which people, when they're trying to group categories together, this is the way we're required to kind of, if we're summarizing them, put them together. And as you can see on this screen, you can, as we spoke about earlier, you can now at least see by category, and we're going to go into detail about what within each of those categories is driving those increases. So as an example, Doug had mentioned, are we going to see where that 3.5 million comes from? And you can kind of here now on these slides get a sense of what, how that 3.5 million or so is being broken up in terms of increase. And tonight, again, we're going to review the general support, where you can see on the screen, and I'm going to speak in more detail about what is contributing to that increase of a proposed right now $287,000 increase in general support. As you can see, when we're not going to be covering this evening, but the instructional budget right now is showing a $1.8 million year-over-year increase. Pupil transportation right now, and we'll get, again, that is an area which we're going to dive into a bit more this evening, is going up about slightly under $200,000 we're projecting. And then again, the undistributed employee benefits, I had mentioned the big driver in that bucket is really the new debt service. So the majority of that $1 million is the new debt. But again, we'll be going through that in more detail, and you can see how that breaks out. Then on the revenue side of the budget, and again, looking at that number, that $3.5 million number, how then do we balance it on the revenue side? And we're going to provide some more details about a little bit further breakdown about these revenues. And again, the way they're broken down here on this general overview really are captured within categories. And we'll break down state aid, which is, again, it has multiple pieces to that. We'll discuss a little bit about, the drivers there. Miscellaneous receipts, I have a slide to kind of break down just so you have a better understanding of the different revenue sources the district receives. And the good news is both of those categories, both the state aid, obviously, I had mentioned earlier, and we've been speaking about it at previous board meetings. We are, based upon our projection from our governor, we're looking at an increase of about $700,000 there. It's wonderful. There were many years that number was actually going in the other direction. So yes, sorry.
Sorry, can you confirm the table title for the percentages at the last column? What was the title there?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just a budget to budget change.
Okay, so that's showing the increased percentage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. So as you can see, that we're very happy, and although that's extremely helpful, $700,000, you can see, as I had mentioned earlier, when your budget is growing by $3.5 million, it's definitely helpful. But as I had mentioned, our expenses really do outpace quite a bit our revenue growth. And we'll break down again. I'll go into further detail on a later slide about our miscellaneous receipts, mostly driven by local sales tax and some other revenues. And then we'll have opportunities either at this point or at further budget presentations to speak about the appropriations from both the reserves that the district has on hand and appropriated fund balance. And really what that refers to is that would be money that's pretty much left over this year from this year's budget spending plan, and that allows us to offset in the following year's budget. We've done that since I've been here. That's a fairly common practice, and the good news is that in years past, we were appropriating significantly more money. This amount represents, I think, a balanced amount, considering we have some new expenses coming on the books. So we are making a recommendation with this budget proposal to increase that a bit over last year's allocation. We did receive quite a bit of money in federal aid this year that came in through our revenue. So, the recommendation would be to either use that to offset next year's tax levy. Retirement reserve, we'll be looking at that in a few slides from now. We are predicting, we're not predicting, we know that our retirement obligations for next year will be going up. The rate that the district has to pay to the TRS, which is the Teachers Retirement System, is in fact going up next year. And the reason we've been able to establish and fund reserves are for times like this, where when we see an uptick in what our payment is, it would be appropriate to increase the appropriation from that reserve. And at a future meeting, we'll be able to provide you kind of where our reserves are now and with those appropriations where that will leave us at by the end of the year, because that's a question that would, if you use this now, what does it look like at year end? So we'll be reviewing that at a future budget session. And again, we're just appropriating the same level from the tax certiorari reserve. And this would be money that would flow back into the budget as because as we were able to pay some obligations, when there's excess money after those obligations are met, we flow that back into the budget. But we'll speak in more detail at further meetings about revenue appropriations. So in terms of where does that put our tax levy for next year to support the $3.5 million increase, that would require us to levy an additional $1.9 million worth of taxes. You'll see on some slides that are coming up that in fact is a tax cap compliant budget. And the effective tax rate, which is interesting, and we can definitely dig into this more if anyone had any questions around it. As you can see, we're right now, based upon the current assessed valuation for next year, that would actually be a reduction in the tax rate. Now, that doesn't mean that an individual homeowners' taxes would be reduced, but it's saying that because there's assessment growth, that it just, the actual effective tax rate is still going down. Obviously, if we didn't levy anything, it would go down even further, but depending on your individual property, we'll speak about more, what does that really mean in terms of impact? But sometimes it is the way we need to show it. It can be a bit confusing when, people see we're levying a bunch of $2 million more, but yet the effective tax rate is actually going down. But we'll speak about that, I think, a bit more in detail at a future meeting.
Can I
Yes.
ask a question?
Sure.
Do you want me to?
Do you want me on this slide? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, do I have to give back my chocolate?
Yes,
side?
yes, I'll take that shot.
So, if I'm reading this correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong, if I look at the adopted budget versus the estimated end of year, right? It looks like our estimated amount of spend is, $650,000 lower, right? And when I look at our adopted budget for revenues and the estimated end, it looks like the revenues have increased by, I don't know, 500K or something. So we're looking at like maybe 1.2 million, right? So did you say what happens to that money?
So I was saying, at the end of the year, you're not required to appropriate it to offset next year's budget. The way we've been able to fund our reserves is based upon how much money each district, obviously has either some money left at the end of the year because you have to, it would be unusual not, if you don't, then you have another problem on your hands. So what typically happens toward the end of the year, if, let's just say there's $2 million left over in the end of fiscal year, we had $1 million extra in revenue and $1 million less in expense. Bill and I would then make a recommendation to the board and say, we're recommending that we put X amount in this reserve. We'll use X amount to balance next year's budget. So right now, conservatively, I know we have $800,000 out of those two kind of buckets. Obviously, it's more than that. That I'm saying we don't want to take the whole amount. We want to. What would happen in this scenario would be that there'd be a recommendation to replenish one of the reserves, because as you see, we're also recommending to take $850,000 out of the retirement reserve. So,
But what's in the retirement reserve?
How
much is in there?
It's about 1.6 million.
Okay. I was just wondering, have you ever, could we consider taking part of that for the property tax line so that the village doesn't have to worry about that?
So we are.
Take some of the money, so we put some in the reserves and then the other goes in, so.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing here.
So, got it. So
Yeah.
that's what happens. So where are those numbers here? Like the extra?
The reserves?
The extra money and the reserves?
That's a separate, those are not shown, that's part of your, it's part of your balance sheet, it becomes part of your balance sheets. It's usually, not usually, we will definitely be presenting the reserves because it is definitely part of, as we consider what we're A, appropriating out of them, B, how much, if we appropriate this year, how much will we have left? Interestingly enough, I was on the phone today with our financial advisor, and we had just received, which I can't actually share publicly, our Moody's rating, which we just got back today. And actually, we confirmed our AA2 rating and kind of all the process that goes in there. And interestingly, I was looking at one of the indicators there, which we know is your amount of reserves, meaning school districts, government entities. Really, the preference, which we've never had because it would be quite a bit of money, they're looking for you to have 27% of your operating budget in a reserve at all times. That would be their preference, free and clear, not but we're not even allowed to keep that much money in reserves. But interestingly, we only have right now, we have 15, which we've been consistent with having 15 or 16 in reserves by either appropriating and replenishing.
Percent, not million.
No, percent.
Right.
Yeah, percent. But we are, when I was looking at it, not that it would really be difficult to even probably get a better rating than we have, because there's only one rating above that, and I don't know anyone who even has it, but they were suggesting if you had more money in reserves, and I'm not saying that, because we would never have that type of money left over, but I think as we talk about reserves, it's important to understand that all districts have them. it is a balance, because although you want to use some, if you use them all in one year, you're going to have a double hole the following. So as we look at what we currently have in reserves, what we're looking to appropriate to balance 22-23's budget, we'll be looking at that 5 years. So saying, okay, if we're appropriating this much, we think we could maybe put a few more dollars back in. And there's a reason you have to do it. Like, you have to actually show you're using it and replenishing it. You know, from an accounting standpoint, there's only a certain amount you're allowed to, you know, how you have to kind of show it flowing through. I mean, every district I know has like a certain amount of reserves, and I think using too much in one year, the issue is you fall off a financial cliff a year or two later. So that would be the reason not to, like, use it all in one shot. So that's why where you see here, the recommendation is looking at what we sort of needed to balance our budget. And we'll speak about the tax cap and why although in this scenario, you could say, well, we could lower that number a bit, it would just kind of put us in a tougher spot next year. So managing how much we use to offset the budget, how much we're using out of reserves, there is a lot of thinking that goes into it, and we'll get into that a bit more. But you can see kind of over the 5-year period, if you end up using even too much in a few years, that you can kind of quickly end up with some like budget holes 2 to 3 years out. So
Can I just, to really clarify, put a really
Yes.
fine point on it, so you came up with that number, like 1.1 million, right? Between the less costs and more revenue. So you'll see appropriated balance under preliminary budget 834, 843. That's 834, 843 of that 1.1 million. So now there's 300 grand left.
Got it.
Then Maureen and Bill will come back with a recommendation of what should we do with that. We should put in a reserve, well, which reserve, and then we vote on which reserve it gets put in. So they're making a judgment call right now of that 1.1 million, 8 and change. We're going to recommend you use towards next year's budget, 300 some, we're going to recommend you put in reserves. And we can have a discussion and debate about that.
Got it. Thank you. Clear. Thanks, guys.
And maybe if we move through, let's flag questions, but why don't we keep moving?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great question. Let's just, if we could, just keep moving through.
yeah, and we could talk
list
about
of
reserves for
questions.
2 hours. It's a lot.
Yep,
It's
I think they may want to stay.
Okay, so again,
Here's
Oh,
one
sorry.
pause. So I've been having this like 9 PM like cap on like whether you, and
They're older than last time.
right, they've matured since the last meeting. You know, I want you guys to feel like comfortable getting what you need and what we need. We've got a lot from you. You also know your own schedules and what you're working on, and there can be a lot. So if you want to, I'm always going to say 9, here's an invitation to leave. But if you need to leave before that, please do. And please know that we are, as long as it's not like 7:45, you know, please know that we, you know, we'll support you with whatever you have going on. Okay, so it's really up to you.
And you might be budding public finance experts, so maybe you want to
If
stay.
you want to stay, there's a lot to learn here.
Yeah, that's true. This is a good learning process.
So Maureen, you want to?
sure.
going?
Yes, yes.
Stay as long as you want.
And Jeremy's not going to ask any questions.
How about that chocolate?
So we now are, as I mentioned before, so the revenue summary, and again, this is just kind of provided to give you a little bit more details behind some of those larger numbers that we show as a summary page. And just sometimes people are interested, like, other than property taxes and state aid, where are some of the other sources of revenue that the district does receive? So here, just as a quick kind of summary, the district charges outside groups that are using the building. Many groups use it at no cost, but there are some after-school programs and some other uses of the gym that provide us some income. Years ago, as many know, when there's been some film shoots in the district, we've actually received hundreds of thousands of dollars there. But, you know, right now, there's nothing on the horizon. So, you know, right now, we're conservatively budgeting that at $35,000 next year. Day school tuition, we do have some students that parents live outside of Hastings and they choose to send their child to this district, and we bill them tuition. It's for next year, it's estimated about $20,000 for K-12 tuition per student. We also have some districts that place some of their students in our in-district special education programs. This year, that number, I think we always have to be, I'm very conservative when I budget that number, because that particular revenue could represent only anywhere from 2 to 4 students, because most of the students are they're higher cost students to the district. And if one of those students we've had, where there's some years where we've received more than we anticipated, because we're not quite clear sometimes on who may send their child here. Those decisions are typically not made till later, where we have the full commitment from the district. And we've also seen where children move out of districts and then we no longer have them. So although it's a great if we can support it, and it's something we can do within our own staffing, and it's not going to be more expensive for the district, we do accept the students if we can. But as you can see, next year, right now, we're projecting, we have a few of those students that are scheduled to go back to their home districts just based on their age of the program that they currently attend. So just, just wanted to kind of highlight some of those. We do, interest rates are very low, as we all know, although the Fed's putting it up in March. But right now, we are kind of holding that line steady, and that's money we make on our money as it sits in the bank. This year, and I just want to highlight the middle column on the next line, and this is some of the driver of those higher revenues for this 21-22 fiscal year. This is some of the monies that we received back from the federal government, and that was some of it was refunding us for some of our COVID expenses that we incurred. So, this year you'll see that was the way that was recognized, was it was taken in as a refund to the district for expenses that we already had paid out. So that is obviously a non-recurring revenue in terms of, like, in future years, we're not going to see those type of refunds back into the district. And then the other ones, just to kind of quickly go through, one of the things that we were required to do this year, which is a new revenue line, other student fee charges. So typically our school trips were handled in, it's called the trust and agency account, which is, it's a fund that is not in our operational account. With the GASB, which is government accounting standards, they make changes from year to year, and they are requiring us to handle all those trips through our general operating account. So as we go through the detailed portion of our instructional budget, you'll see that we are now showing like trips as an expenditure line, but this is for parent-funded trips, so that's why you see this revenue line showing. So it will be a wash in terms of it. It will show an increase on the expense side, but we have a corresponding revenue that we now are budgeting here, and that's based upon estimates from all 3 buildings of the trips that all the students were anticipating to take next year that would be funded by their families. Again, admissions to theaters, like another one of those lines. We get money when people come to see our plays. We will be, for the first time in many years, billing out health services to other districts. That's primarily due to, my goodness gracious, the private school in town. Melissa, help me.
Yeah.
The one at Andrus?
No. Oh my gosh, why am I, we're after
Yeah.
8 o'clock.
I know it is.
Just give me 2 seconds.
So there is a private school that was recently established in Hastings, and as that school has grown, Hudson Lab. So as that school has grown, the needs, we have to provide nursing services and different related services to children that attend there, some of which are Hastings, some of which are students coming from other districts. Because of that, we are able, there's some really specialized services that some of the students there are receiving that we're currently paying for. So this revenue, it is shown, we'll have an expense on our expense side of the budget, but it will be reimbursed. So again, it looks good on the revenue side, but we really do have expenses that we're paying on the other side of the budget for those services. Borderline properties, we have a bunch of property in both Dobbs Ferry and in Yonkers that the property line for those properties is split between Hastings and Dobbs Ferry and Hastings and Yonkers. In those properties, the students are either able to attend our school or the other school in which their property resides. And this represents the money we get back from that district. We bill them to kind of, if the children attend here, to recoup some of those property taxes. Unclassified revenues, these can be E-rate rebates, rebates from BOCES for services that we've paid for in prior years, because BOCES is required once they've closed their books to run a zero budget, so they need to return to us anything they may have overcharged us on. Not overcharges, they estimate what the charges need to be. So those are just some examples of unclassified revenues. Again, I spoke about the sales tax. Sales tax revenue is wonderful, beyond the increase that they, I think it was 2 years now, that the property, the sales tax increase went into place in Westchester, but the sales also have been very, very high the last couple of years, so we are anticipating to receive what we received this year. And then, again, the other big driver of new revenue is the state aid, and primarily driven by our foundation aid increase. I just want to note here that although we're concluding our building project, because of the way the state aid runs on the building project, we're getting like a catch-up payment the following year. So we'll speak a little bit more about the way that works. So although we're paying for the debt, we will get all the money they owe to us, but the first aid payment for that work occurs when 18 months after either the contract was signed. So, there may be an adjustment to this number, meaning we may end up receiving more state aid next year. We're just closing out our project, so I didn't want to represent it here until I was sure we were getting that revenue next year, because what would then happen is then the following year we would see a larger chunk of building aid coming in to make up for that first aid payment. And then, again, the appropriated fund balance, retirement reserve, and the other amounts that we spoke about on the previous slide. And then, of course, the large property tax levy needed to support the $56 million budget. So now, state aid. This is, again, just to kind of go over, where we are in terms of this cycle. So again, state aid, this is a really brief summary of about 500 pages of how they calculate each school district's aid. It's really, it's very interesting, but, what it really comes down to is the way state aid is allocated to districts. It makes sense of how they calculate it. They look at the wealth of a particular district, demographic information. They do look at real, I'm talking about the side. I'm looking at my screen. They look at real property wealth is a component, and of course we know that in this part of the state, the property values are significantly higher than upstate. So again, that is something that either determines, how much state aid a district receives. So it does make sense. I just want to give you a comparison. So districts like Rochester, of course, they are high needs districts. Buffalo. And, some of the less financially stable districts upstate, their budget, they're receiving about 85% of their budget is supported by state aid dollars, where ours is 10%. So just to kind of give you, it's significantly, most of the state aid, there's a lot of money that goes into public education in New York State. Between New York City and some of those high needs districts, they receive the bulk of the money, and it really is based upon, obviously, the factors as we spoke about, because it's based upon need. Districts, believe it or not, like Yonkers, New Rochelle, White Plains, and Mount Vernon, because they're located in Westchester County, they're significantly underfunded for the needs that they have in their district. So because of their high property values, that does cut the amount of money they would normally receive. So where we are in terms of the budget process, our governor, executive proposal, it's typically usually the lowest of the numbers. So, well, at least in past years, the starting point, typically it gets a little bit better from there. I have sat on a couple meetings with the legislators, and the sense I'm getting is since this particular governor has in fact has actually fully funded or committed to fully fund the state aid. Unlike our previous governor, occasionally those numbers would be significantly lower. She's put a good amount of money into the education fund for her budget. So I don't anticipate the numbers to change. So in past years, I would say, well, this is a real low number we're getting in January. It's more than likely to go up a bit once the legislators are able to kind of work with the governor. I know that our legislators, my group is meeting with them, I think, next Friday. We have some other items being that we were kind of told, like, listen, a lot of the money is already represented, we don't anticipate having a lot more money given to you, but there may be some other things we can help work for districts that may be better for us, such as like relief around the tax cap and some of those things. And I'll speak to that when I get to the slide that breaks down the tax cap. And again, the enacted budget, they've been on time for the last few years, so it is due in April. And that's based on their state's fiscal year. And I keep clicking.
Maureen, can I just check in, do a quick time check? Like,
Yep.
how much time do you think? I think we're about halfway through here.
I think the rest of them are probably like another 2 hours. No, they're like 15 minutes. No, they're 15 minutes.
Like 15 or 20?
Yeah.
I'm going to target that?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So it's hard to know because it's like a lot, so I don't want you to think
No,
I'm
no,
rushing through the
and
numbers
some of
either.
it,
It's
'cause
hard.
We're balancing like education and sharing of decisions being made at the same time.
Yep.
But I like that, we've put it out there for the public, and we've
Yep.
put it out there for the board members, So as you guys, as we all absorb it, we are allowed to write questions directly to Maureen during the week. And we put it all, if there's something big you want to know about.
So for example,
Otherwise-
you're going into tax cap calculation. I still don't understand this completely, having been on the board for 6 years, how, and some of this, there's like magic numbers in here. I don't know exactly where they're pulled from, but, so it's this kind of stuff that we can go through fairly quickly and.
When we go to the line.
I'm just saying,
You're never going to understand it. so
Yeah,
let's go.
but I also
Rated
think that even if you've been here for 6 years and you don't get it, so I think I'm totally assimilating, and I don't think we need to totally rush everything. Like this, we wanted to start it early, but some of us that I just knew we really want to fully understand it, and I'm typing my questions, but like Jeremy said, I would rather email it to you than
That's
try
fine.
to spend
You'll
so
get
much
it, yeah.
time. But I'd rather we don't ask questions here, but understand. So
Okay,
I
perfect.
wouldn't want her to be rushed, you get what I mean? So that we would rather write the questions than, so I'm totally.
Yeah, I think that's because
understanding.
I'm trying to balance there with some of the board
Exactly.
members.
I'm
and
totally
There's a lot
understanding, that's
going
why
on.
I'm
Yeah.
quiet.
Okay, so this next, we spoke about all these. This is just, again, summarizes, the increase is similar to the expenditure side, just kind of highlights on the revenue where some of the increases are coming from. So again, that's, as Doug had mentioned, the tax cap calculation, this sheet here that is actually the sheet that we fill out and we submit. It's a copy of what that looks like. So just to kind of, again, this is given to us by the state, and there's different factors, but really the long and short of it is that New York State, I don't know how many years back now it is, close to 10 years, they enacted what is called a tax cap. And really the idea there was to, of course, limit growth on people's property taxes. And there is a formula that is given to us to calculate what that increase from year to year is. And there are certain aspects of the tax cap calculation that are individual to each district. And that's why some of them, if you were to look at somebody else's, some of the factors, other than the allowable levy growth factor, which is the same, everything else is unique to a district. But I won't necessarily go through all the details of it, and we could definitely speak about it. I could speak to people individually about it. But based upon our calculation and what this year, of course, no surprise here, CPI we all know is well over 2%, and the cap for calculating the tax cap calculation can never exceed 2%. So that is in fact our allowable levy growth for everyone. And then in addition, we have some other allowable growth, because one of the exceptions to the tax cap is when you have approved debt that is coming onto the books, because that was previously voted on by the community, that can be added to the tax cap calculation, because if it wasn't, you would then have to cut like a considerable amount of your budget. So what does that mean for Hastings? That meant that we were allowed to increase our tax levy, being tax cap compliant, by 4.35%. Currently, we are, the budget that we've shared with you this evening is just slightly below that calculation. So we're just $28,000, a little bit less than what our allowable full cap would allow us to levy. And again, the reason we share this, and a lot of districts do, because there is always a lot of talk around tax cap and all these different, different things, and it's just, kind of just threw this slide in here so so you can review, or anyone at home, kind of just some of the, as we refer to different parts of it, what we're really talking about here. So, again, it's the CPI. Most know that's the computer price index. Again, even when it is the reason it's always been something that all districts have struggled with, because although there are years, of course, where it's less than 2%, we're now finding, especially this upcoming year, that is way higher than 2%. But yet, even if we have expenses that are exceeding that 2% growth, our budget cannot exceed that. And that is some of the conversations we've had with legislators, asking for some relief around that, even if it were just in some of these higher years, if there's anything that either can be added to the tax cap as an exclusion. So I know we're in the process of talking about that. Again, for this evening, I'm not going to go through all of these slides. I just kind of included them here because it actually, the next few slides are our entire budget. And again, this is kind of the next level down from that summary detail. It's a little bit more of, it's still a summary, because as we go through all of our budget meetings, we're going to then unpack each of these lines. So tonight we're going to go through the general support, as I mentioned, and we're going to get into more detail. I typically just have it here, just again, this is our first budget presentation for people at home. They have an opportunity to kind of review each of these larger areas, and if they have any questions around them. But I'm just going to quickly go through these, because we're going to get into the details around the non-instructional portion of the budget. So again, you can see our budget, and our budget has to be balanced. Although there are years in which either one number will be higher or lower, when we present our budget, it always has to be presented as a balanced revenues and expenses. So here we are with the non-instructional budget. So this will actually go a little bit quicker, and I don't know if there are any, we're not going to ask any questions, is that on?
I should just wait. Yeah, I
Okay.
should just gathering them up,
Okay,
because then at the end, I have a suggestion on then how we can best be of help.
sure. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, this is, and the function codes on the left, there's an order. The way our budget, it's the way we report our budget, the way we report our financials. It's the left, the function, you can think of it as like a chart of accounts and accounting, and these are the accounts assigned to these particular areas. They're statewide, and that is how districts present their budget in order of those account codes. So the first area here, Board of Education, I know everybody on this panel knows, but Board of Education is not paid. They're fully volunteer. Occasionally people just see this kind of title, and there's all the expense related to this area, again, is typical how districts budget and express these expenses. And just as an example of what some of these represent, we have board policies that we're required to keep up. We do pay a service to assist us in that. There's a cost in maintenance of that service. The board docs in which we use to run our board meetings, there's a cost for that software and the maintenance of that software. The district clerk, who just left the room, there's a stipend that she receives to be the clerk of the board. And again, from a budgetary requirement, financial requirement, and how we report our expenses, it's required to be represented here. And then again, our annual vote, we do have to pay people to run and work those votes, as well as rent the machines and the ballots and such. So as you can see in this area, the area in which there's some increases, mostly driven by the current stipend amount for the district clerk. Again, these were estimates last year, so it's not that we're anticipating a large increase, but rather that it represents what the current district clerk receives. So that's part of the increase. And then the remainder are just for memberships. The board, and when I say the board, it's really the school district belongs to like NISBA and West Putt, like the different board affiliated ones. And there's a couple that are school district affiliated memberships that we, as do most districts, participate in. And some are for advocacy and just to make sure we're getting all the up-to-date relevant information. So as you can see, we're projecting that increase to be about 7.32, but again, that's really based on actual expenditures this year rather than a large increase. Central administration, that is the superintendent's office. Again, that is the way it is represented in other districts. That's the title of that department. This department, these particular lines, it represents the salary for the superintendent, his instructional staff member, not instructional, administrative assistant support member, and then some other kind of contractual services and supplies for running that office. Most administrators, there's certain professional memberships. Again, it is for the superintendent, but it is more for the school district as a whole. And as you can see, the increase there is based upon projected salaries for those individuals. Finance, again, that is the business office department, and that is for all the folks that work in the business office, which includes payroll, employee benefits, purchasing, accounts receivable, general accounting, and claims auditor, and all of our auditing. And all of these different auditors are required by law. I'd be happy if that could be cut out. We have many different audits that the district is required to have, and there's a cost to perform those. The main driver in this particular area of the budget is the folks in my office that many of them are in a union, and that represents their salary increases scheduled for next year based on the union that they're represented by. But other than that, we're relatively flat. Again, this is just on the previous slide, you'll notice in my office where the contractual services for the business office are a bit different than you'll see in other departments, because this is just some examples of things that are really not, we have to participate in. All of our employees, we manage a cafeteria plan, Section 125. That's like a 403B 457 plan. We have 150 employees that participate in that. There's a lot of IRS guidelines around that. We have to have an outside party help us manage that. There's about 40 different plans people participate in, so that is a requirement to make sure we're IRS compliant. We have File Bank, which is a storage retention. That's really for the entire district, but again, many of these, this money is budgeted within the business office, although it represents like district-wide services. Because we don't have much file space here, we have a tremendous amount of file retention off-site that we do have to pay for. Huh?
You want to, is it the next
Oh
slide?
gosh, I'm sorry. I keep just, I got to stop looking at my thing, sorry.
You're just trying to confuse me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I know I am. You're like, wait, I know. See if you're awake. Again, these other things, bidding, but I just want to highlight this because that particular, if you look at, it's like $35,000 and it really does get eaten up. This is a year over year. We have financial disclosures and all these
But
different
if
things.
it's 35,000, it's the teeniest items we're gonna see anywhere, pretty
Yeah.
much, right?
No, only because in other areas, like in other offices, you'll see it to be like 5,000. You might be like, oh, Maureen, how many professional
How many
organizations do you
file
belong
cabinets
to?
you got?
So, and then legal, again, legal services, the board's aware, obviously, we're required to have legal counsel. We pay a retainer with some general legal services that we, obviously, it's an important service. We use quite a bit of it. It is an important thing to do with everything we do, from staff to contracts and anything we engage in. As you can see, there's different, we're basing it based upon this year's usage of that legal representation. We are projecting a decrease in some of the litigation. Again, this is a pretty preliminary number, but I'm basing it based upon this year thus far. So overall, we're kind of going up in one area of legal and down in the other. Personnel, that is our human resource department. There's one staff member that is assigned to that, and that's really for professional staff, which a lot of it has more, it's not on the benefit payroll side of things, it's more on the professional licensing and all the things that go on in schools that require us to have a person who's overseeing that department, making sure everyone is up to date with everything they need and helping us recruit. The next portion, so this is a portion of the budget, and we'll go into a bit, well, I'll highlight here the kind of drivers. In our buildings and grounds department of our budget, which I'm sure many of us just as homeowners who are experiencing right now, we're seeing a large increase in utility costs. We were notified of that a few months ago. It actually started, it's hitting us a bit this year with our last couple rounds of bills. The Con Edison bill, I think, is up about 20% over where it was last year. So right now, based upon, and again, this is based upon what they've given to the district, suggesting that we anticipated an increase of somewhere close to a 20%, in some areas more than that range of an increase in our utilities, and when you already pay a good amount of money, when it goes up 20%, the dollars add up pretty quickly. We are also looking at putting a couple more dollars under the construction manager and architect side of the budget. What we found is that it is really invaluable, even when we're doing some small repair work around the district, to really have some of those professional services, because there's this, when dealing with an old building, we wanted to bump that up a bit. We have some other kind of planning that we're starting to engage in this year. We think some of that will be needed to next year. So that's why you're seeing an increase in those professional services there. And then the others are, like I had mentioned, really being driven with the increase in utility costs. And of course, with having, although this is not the main driver of it, we will be having some more space at Hillside. We have now many of our areas of the building that we've added air conditioning, including the middle school auditorium that we anticipate will be used all the time. Previously did not have air conditioning. So between the utility costs and some increase in usage, we anticipate needing, in this area, the budget to go up a bit. And again, under the BOCES services, which again, you see those going up at a higher percentage, much of it is just based on our current usage of those services. Sometimes we try to budget a bit lower, and then what we're finding is some of those costs, particularly like phone service, we have phones, that's driven by whatever the cost was this year for BOCES. I think we were a little bit too low on the budget, so we're just kind of anticipating budgeting what we've experienced this year. Everyone has a phone in the classroom. Just the cost of the increased service, and then plus an increase that we experienced this year with that service through BOCES. And then the other services, we do a lot through BOCES. We have yearly HERA reports, which are a requirement that we need to submit records. You need to have an outside agency. HERA is really to make sure the environmental testing and all that's done. Those services are quite costly. If it's really, anytime you have them come out here and they do any type of air monitoring or testing, it's really easy to run into like $7,000 or $8,000 a day in that type of work. So this really represents what we anticipate our needs will be next year. And then again, to be honest with you, this portion of the budget, and I just want to highlight this here as we discuss it, and balancing, I know we have to invest. We have to make sure we're not sometimes being too shortchanged on our facilities, because the facilities, they do require a good amount of upkeep. And to be honest with you, when we started with this budget process, this budget was going up considerably higher. I mean, Joe Monterano, who is our director of facilities, as well as meeting with the individual principals, there are different needs in the building, and we're always trying to balance that. We do have to keep up certain repair work, but there were many requests that came in that we have not included in our budget proposal that we would have liked to have done. We have, there's always just a certain amount of things that we would like to address. So again, that's not to make anybody scared. I'm just saying this is an area of the budget that, much of the increases here are being driven solely out of our control, utility costs and such as that. But just to also say that, there were things that Joe and I discussed, or different things that, he would love to, of course, he's our facilities director. He's always looking to improve our facilities. So we really try to balance that with some of the increases this year. So, as of right now, we feel for next year we can kind of make do with what we have elsewhere. But, that's an area we always have to be mindful of, making sure there's a certain amount of money available for anything that needs to be done on our facilities. Special items. So again, like anyone, we have insurance, and that's our general liability insurance that covers all of our property, our vehicles. It includes insurance on our employees of all sorts of, not workers' comp, but things such as, like, we have a bond, so if anybody does something wrong and the district gets sued, there's like different types of insurances that we're required to have. We have cyber insurance. We have builder's risk insurance, and this covers it all. And again, we are an insurance reciprocal, and I can tell you that this, the amount of insurance, we're very well insured. They worked very well with us during IDA. They covered all the expenses we submitted to them. And this, although it looks like a large number, it really, for what we're insuring, is not. And then the other items here, assessment Greenberg, that's for our sewer taxes we pay. That's the only type of taxes that the school district does pay. I spoke about earlier that we collect taxes from neighboring districts. We have some of our students who choose to go to the other district, and then we pay them. So that's what that represents. And we do have, I think that's one student that attends Dobbs Ferry. And then the last piece on this sheet that is really a dollar amount is our BOCES admin charges. I've explained this in the past. We are a component district of Southern Westchester BOCES. That is not, we would of course like to participate with them, but that is not, that's a requirement. That's not something we opted into. Even if we use none of BOCES services, we would be required to pay this portion. We would have to pay administrative charges because we are considered a component district. If anyone is interested, I know it would take a while to explain that relationship and how these pay and what this cost represents. But really, there's a certain portion of the BOCES budget, which is, as it says, administrative costs and capital costs, rentals of space that they have throughout Westchester. Each component district, they take those costs and they split them up based upon your enrollment size. Transportation, and of course, it's like makes sense because their expenses will, their cost of doing business is significant year to year. So we do anticipate those contracts. As you can see, I'm anticipating a 5%, and that's based upon conversations I've had with my counterparts in Ardsley who help assist us in running our transportation consortium, as well as conversations with colleagues around the area. And what we're anticipating that the cost of busing service will go up at least 5% next year, if not more, based on CPI, which may actually be higher. And then the larger piece, which of course is the main area of transportation that we focus a lot on each year, is our out-of-district consortium. And out-of-district is transportation for all students that the district places out-of-district at programs. So if we have children that we make the recommendation,
Well, good evening. Welcome to Budget 101. Maureen and I will be guiding you through the budget this evening. Most of the work is Maureen's. Most of what you'll hear tonight is from Maureen. I will just set the stage with a few slides, a few pieces of information that echo what the board received just earlier this week, or actually it was last week, as I think about it. So we want to first review for you, let me get the slides moving. We want to first review for you the budget calendar. If you're familiar with the process here, it covers a couple months, runs from February 7th through a vote on May 17th. The board votes on April 19th, and then after that there's a budget hearing. But those are the dates. That's the process we're into. As Maureen will explain, a lot of work has gone on over the last several months even to get to this point. The budget goals are very important to us. Those have been set by the administration, also in consultation with the board. You see here 6 major goals, everything from stressing the high quality education for our students, all the way through maintaining and working within the tax cap. It's very important to us that we strive for excellence, as these goals explain, as well as working within the financial limits for the village as dictated by both residents and also by the state. The purpose of this budget is fourfold. It allows us to advance the beliefs, values, and aspirations that we're here for all children. It ensures that the district has the resources necessary to educate all students. The budget also becomes a motivating force for strategic planning and action. And a budget is a way for us to align our fiscal priorities with our long-term initiatives. As in any year and in any locale, there are realities that shape us as we try and get this budget going. Enrollment is quite a significant shaper, reality, driver for us, and Maureen will speak to that in a little bit. Special ed is a critical area of importance for us in any public education sector, and certainly in Hastings. and that is a factor as we work to manage the budget. We are morally and ethically, educationally committed to providing all the services students who have special needs require. That does carry with it a certain level of expense. Student needs are becoming more and more complex, and that's across all of our students, especially as we work our way out of the most intense aspects of COVID-19. Out-of-district tuition is a reality for us, which Maureen will speak to. And enrollment, we are in a very good place with enrollment. We like students. We like having students here, so you'll see that we're actually in a very good place. But new enrollment can carry an impact on us. And lastly, I would say despite an era where we're seeing quite significant increases in state aid tied to uncommon federal largesse, our expenses still will outpace revenues. And again, the tax burden, we pay attention to the tax burden on our families. There are a set of very specific drivers of expenses. As Maureen's going to explain, most of our budget is allocated to personnel contracts, and there are built-in expenses there. Programs, pension costs, health insurance is often a significant driver. We do have some good news there this year that Maureen will explain. And again, enrollment and class size, we've talked about that. And lastly, capital projects and debt. Hastings has done, especially under Maureen's leadership and the board's leadership, done a superb job to ensure that this footprint here at the Farragut Complex and up the hill at Hillside is first rate. And as you know, there's some significant capital projects, 3 major ones, some nearly done, underway, and there's a debt aspect to that that is now coming due that Maureen will speak to. Year-to-year budget variances, I won't go through this entire list, but even before we get into any new initiatives, these variances will drive annual increases. Many of those have been referred to in these preceding slides, but that total push ahead of these variances is over $3 million. So just in a sense, almost standing still, our budget goes up $3.3 million. So let me now turn to Maureen, who will take us forward. Is that right, Maureen?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
That's perfect.
thank you.
I'll speak quicker, thanks. Okay. Yes, I just wanted to mention that for those at home, I was made aware that the slide deck may be difficult to watch. I just wanted to note that tomorrow the entire slide deck will be online, as well as we are also doing another taping of the meeting, so we'll be able then to also post that as well. So, but for purposes here, I think it'll just be still helpful because we're walking through some of the presentation, and then you can review it tomorrow online. So again, the next graphic here, we've used this graphic for the last number of years, and I think it's really just a good graphic to demonstrate you know, the two aspects of school budgeting, which is of course expenses and revenues. And as required by law, we are required to present to our public a balanced budget. And it's a continuous balancing act to ensure that we're able to do so. This budget overview, this is where our current budget that we presented an overview on last week. And again, I'm not going to walk through each number here, but as Bill had mentioned, right now we're currently looking at a push-ahead budget, more or less of about a $3.3 million change. And last week we started to unpack the increases in terms of expense, and we're going to be getting into a lot more detail at our upcoming budget meeting on March 7th. And again, then on the revenue side of the picture, as we had mentioned earlier, we're very grateful and thankful to see the increases in our state aid, and we are appreciative of those and some other revenue increases. But even with that, it's still a challenge because as we will go through on some of the slides, much of the burden in this area of the state does fall on individual homeowners. Enrollment. So again, this is just a really quick review of the enrollment. In this, you'll see some historical trends. I think just really what I want to point out here on this, on the next few slides, each school is broken down, and it starts actually in 2009 and brings us to the present time. One of the things we've been seeing and our trend data going forward also confirms is that we have very steady enrollment, if not slightly increasing enrollment. And There was a time, many years ago in the early 90s where, the enrollment here was down, but we have been seeing a consistent and steady trend in our enrollment, and this is one of the aspects we do look at as we are planning our upcoming budget as well as future budgets about where, how many students are we going to have, and making sure that we take that into consideration in preparation of our budgets. This slide here, again, is now looking at what we're currently projecting as well as some data and projections of our enrollment. And as you can again see on this slide, we are continuing to see that incremental increase over the time and even in years where it's either relatively flat. Currently, our trend data is suggesting that we will have within our buildings about 1,670 students. So again, seeing a steady increase in enrollment. Again, this is just another graphical representation, and this is actually, again, just showing what I previously shared and shows how that trend data on a graph for the upcoming 5 years. Revenue. So revenue, we're going to just unpack that a bit more. And that is a big driver of all school budgets, of course, because, like anything else, the amount of money that you're able to generate also has to be taken into consideration as we develop our spending plan each year. So revenue is definitely a challenge. One of the things that we'll talk about when we talk about state aid is that in this area of the state, especially here in Westchester County, where there's in state funding, because Westchester is the perception that it is a wealthy county in the state, that also has some implications for the amount of state aid that schools here receive. Another thing that Bill had mentioned was that, again, working within the state imposed tax cap limits growth, and as we'll be talking about in much more detail at future meetings, and comes of no surprise to anybody listening, currently the inflation is really outpacing, is at a historic high, but we are still limited in terms of spending on the tax cap side to a 2% cap in terms of what is considered consumer price index growth. And then again, there's just some other, items here where, the impacts of kind of what goes on at this state, and in terms of what happens when the federal revenues may not be available. All of those pieces are of constant concern to us as we think about the amount of money that we're going to generate from state aid. The other piece of the equation beyond the state is locally. So as we know, Hastings is a wonderful community, and not unlike many schools in Westchester, we do have a limited commercial tax base. And again, as we know, when that occurs in villages, that does put the kind of the majority of the bill on individual homeowners. And in Hastings, we're very aware of this, and we do keep this in mind as we're developing our spending plans. And again, that does typically also not enable us at times to consider expanding programming and things, because we're constantly trying to balance that burden and with our tax cap restraints. And again, just mentioning where in other sometimes local districts where we see a little bit greater of a commercial tax base, that does in fact help them to occasionally have some other things that we would really fall solely on our homeowners. So that's also a challenge for us. Again, this slide is just a graphical representation of the breakdown of our revenue, and we'll be just touching on those in the next few slides. Again, the majority of our revenue, we say this all the time and acutely aware of this, is our tax levy, which is the taxes that we levy on the residents and businesses in Hastings. And that piece of our budget revenue is clearly, it's always between 82, sometimes 84% of our budget. Typically, this number is actually a little bit higher, but with the increase of state aid, we're seeing it be at 82.4% of this upcoming year. And again, when we speak about tax levy, that really just means that it's not speaking about tax rate, but it's just that pure dollar amount of revenue that we're levying from the entire school district. Again, not unlike other districts, this is very common in Westchester County, where it is the largest component of a school district's revenue. The next largest area of revenue comes from the state. And again, this upcoming year, we're anticipating 11.4% of our revenue package to be in fact coming from the state's share of the education funding. And again, there is a formula, and as I had mentioned earlier, part of being in Westchester County, and although we're very grateful for the increases we do see there, I think we'll always be limited to the amount we receive based upon the way the formula is written, and that continues, although we're grateful. Well, I don't see this as ever being really above probably 15%, and we have seen that number even be in the single digits. So I just wanted to kind of highlight on this one page, well, two things that we are seeing a $700,000, we're anticipating a $700,000 increase next year. We are cautious, we're cautiously optimistic. We know that we are seeing an increase in foundation aid. We are just mindful that right now the state has received a lot of money in the last few years from the federal government. We want to make sure that their ability to continue to fund not only Hastings, but other school districts in New York will continue to be met when that revenue source is no longer available to them. So we want to be really cautious about that going forward in our projections of state aids. I just wanted to, the one thing, and we've spoken about this before, in the 1980s, doesn't feel like that long ago, but I guess it was, 30% of the school funding in Hastings actually did come from the state. And that was 30 to 40%, and it has decreased. Each year it has gone down, and we kind of more or less has leveled out now at about that 10 to 11% range. Other revenues, sales tax, tuition, some facilities usage we receive, and interest income. Although not tremendous amounts of money, again, it definitely helps offset some of our budget. Then the other large piece that that helps balance our budget is what we call our fund balance. So each year, what we have available, meaning whatever monies maybe we have in savings from this year or in prior fiscal years that we feel will help us balance our upcoming budget, is what we call an appropriated fund balance. And it's a fairly common practice, so not unlike your own home budget, where you may have some either additional monies left over after a particular year. What we do in the schools, obviously, once that we have those additional monies, we can either put those into reserves or use them to offset future budgets. And that has been a practice that Hastings has done by either determining how much should go in reserves and how much should be appropriated to offset the following year's budget. I think the one thing, and we do have a lot of conversations around this, is we always just want to be mindful of not using it for one-shot infusions of revenue, because it isn't always a recurring, it's recurring in a sense that most years you'll have somebody left over, but it's not a guarantee. And you could have a year in which there's some unforeseen expenses and you don't have much money left over. So, relying solely on this revenue, we need to be very conservative in this approach and be very comfortable in whatever we're using to offset. Currently, in this current fiscal year, 21-22, we used approximately $530,000 or so to balance our budget. We are currently in our budget plan for next year, we are looking to increase that a bit. Partially that's because the district has received a good amount of federal monies this year, and we feel comfortable in either putting up that dollar amount a bit. And again, this is a lot of thinking that goes into what the appropriate amount is. So tax cap and levy. And again, I bring up these words because I think Many times, we talk about tax rate, tax cap, tax levy, and again, this is just, again, I'm not going to walk through every bullet on this slide, but when the slide deck is here, I think it's important because as we're unpacking the budget and speaking about some of these different items and the impact they have on our budget, this is just, again, good information for those that when we're using the word tax cap, what does that really mean? And the tax cap is what the state it's been in place since 2011, and it really limits, it helps to limit districts' amount of taxes they raise each year. And although districts can exceed it, it does require a supermajority vote. So since 2012-13, which was the first year it had to be fully implemented, the district has remained at or under the cap. So that is always our goal, and it is challenging again especially when the inflation is really outpacing this cap. And again, this is a demonstration of what we are anticipating our 2022-23 tax cap amount to be, and based upon the formula, all of which is given to us by New York State. Currently, our allowable tax rate, tax levy increase amount based on the formula would be $1.9 million. Our current budget plan is below that a little bit by about $200,000 or so. We're currently showing a $1.7 million increase to our levy. Again, tax cap limit, these are our slides you can kind of review. Just some historical data on what the range of those tax cap limits have been, and also, again, it just speaks to, some of the parameters around it. Again, tax cap challenges, and I'm just going to highlight a couple on this slide. The tax cap, although it is, in a lot of ways, I think we appreciate the intent of it, and making sure that all government entities are really being mindful of the increases passed along to their taxpayers. It is challenging when you're creating a tax. We're unlike a business. We have new students. We have to educate them, as Bill had mentioned earlier. Children have different needs. Post-pandemic, we're seeing needs, other, special education, whatever those needs may be, not only special ed, we are committed and required to make sure that we have money available to meet the needs of all students. And when we set a budget and there's children that, any time of the year, we have new students enter the system. So again, these are just kind of some things that although we do our best planning, it is sometimes difficult as there are some things that are beyond our control in a school. And again, I'm not going to walk through these, but again, just for informational purposes, as we continue to talk about the budget, this gives us some definitions of the difference between the cap and the levy. So tax levy planning. So we put these here before more as like Q&As, and these are things that have been asked in previous sessions by some folks who have attended. And one of them is, how do you maintain your programs when the allowable tax cap increase is less than your year-over-year expenses? And I think, currently each year is a year unto itself, and each year there's sometimes you may have a natural reduction in some expenses because either something comes off the books or there's some attrition in staff with either retirements where you gain some savings. Every year we do, even regardless of the tax cap, we do approach our budget with, of course, looking at different things we may want to do. We always want to look, as we all do, at efficiencies that there may be available to us. So I think each year, sorry, he's making some noise here. We are able to stay under it. It is challenging, and yes, there are some trade-offs in doing so, because we, unfortunately with the limitation, but I do think there are times in which is just part of our budget process, even without the tax cap, we do go through a thorough process and evaluate all of our expenses, and I don't want to say, it's kind of like a zero-based budgeting approach, and we'll speak about that, meaning we do try to, kind of really understand what our needs will be for the following year. And again, this is just some factual information about what 1% on the levy, so a 1% increase, and I just have it here, and you can review it. It's approximately for each 1% increase in your tax rate, your individual tax rate, it allows the district to spend an additional about $450,000. So currently, the budget that we started to unpack last week would increase homeowners' taxes by approximately 3.8%. And the majority of that, we'll speak to it, as Bill had mentioned, one of the bigger drivers this year was the first payment toward the debt for the capital work that was done over the last about 2.5 years. So we are seeing that come on the books. So that part of the expense is attributing to about 1.5% of that increase. Fund balance. Okay. So again, these are just slides, and I think, again, we tried to capture things that as we talk it through our budget, upcoming budget presentations, there will be talk around fund balance, and, people may say, well, where's that coming from, and, how much money is available? So again, these are just some kind of definitions around what the fund balance is. I kind of went over it a little bit earlier on the slide deck. And then again, why is it important for the district to have fund balance? And again, that's just kind of share there, like any other organization or home, it is important to, of course, have savings and to ensure, as I had mentioned, there could be unanticipated expenses that either, after we establish our budget. So it is always important, although we put some back to our following year budget, we also have to be mindful of ensuring that we have money for rainy day funds. And again, reserves. Reserves and fund balance are kind of synonymous, except fund balance is almost like your savings, and the reserves are actually savings accounts, but that are established for a very specific purpose, where the fund balance we are allowed to keep up to 4% of our subsequent year's budget in what is a fund balance, and it's more or less free and clear. Reserves, when we speak about reserves, those are for expenses that the district is obligated or has an obligation to pay, and we have savings set aside for that. So when there'll be some talks about, how much of the reserves should we use in any particular year or fund balance, they're similar, but they're slightly different. And because of that, we have, provided some details on the slides. And again, I had mentioned how our reserves, similar to fund balance, it really comes from, you have, as an example, last year, we received more federal funds than we anticipated and more state aid. So what happens with that money? We typically, obviously, we don't just say, oh, we have extra money, let's just spend it. We try to save it, right? We get some extra dollars in, we use it if we need it for, as we've been using to help for some student loss and some other items. But if we're getting extra state aid and things like that, we then put it away in either a reserve or use it to offset that following year's budget. Again, here, I know even if the slide was clear to everyone, it would be hard to view on the screen. This is just, again, a historical look at some of the fund balances, some projections. I mean, the good news is a few years back, when we were seeing a reduction in state aid and some other revenues, some of our projections there were not as good as now we're finding the last few years. We've had some additional state aid, which was some unanticipated. We're seeing some growth in other revenues, and because of that, it's helped stabilize our reserves for at least the time being. And again, it is important to be mindful of that it is important to have some money on hand for unanticipated expenses. So, with all that being said, we really kind of went heavy on the revenue side, because we will be, in our budget presentations, really unpacking all the different, our expenditure plan. It is important just to understand, the limitations around revenue, and that's why we try to get a little bit deeper into that conversation at these meetings, just to kind of show that it's a difficult balance in when you have some limited revenues and some uncertainty around your revenues, and then how does that impact our ability when we're creating our budget. So again, as I had mentioned earlier, what are the components of a budget development for a school? Again, we do use a zero-based budgeting approach. That being said, obviously there are some things that are rolling over, but we do look at each year. We look at our enrollment data, we look at our students, we look at all the needs of the system, whatever they may be. And we really start from a place of things that obviously we're going to keep, other things like can we either, save money here or be efficient, or can, we look at all different ways, because each year is an opportunity to kind of reset the budget. So we don't just roll over if a dollar amount was in a budget one year. Again, student needs assessment, which also includes, and Melissa and Bill have done a lot of work in this way using survey data to really try to dig down about school climate, attendance, performance. So much of our budget development is done by a needs assessment, which is data-driven. So there is a lot that goes on all year round with the leadership team to really understand what those needs may be by individual student. Demographics, as I mentioned, and live birth data, that's our enrollment. And again, we rely on, we actually do use live birth data from the county. We look at housing data. We're in touch with preschools and things like that to try to really gauge what our incoming student population will be. Unfunded mandates, although many mandates, there are some that we would do anyway, whether it was mandated or not. I believe most schools would, but there are some things that are out of our control that, although may be well-intended, that the state may or the federal government may say you have to do, even testing, although that is one example where we do have to grade them and score them, and there's a cost in even doing that. That's a small example. There's many things that, come down into different types of like changes in government and standards and things that are wonderful, but there's a cost in getting, different firms to kind of do some of that work. So those are things, and each year there tends to be, some new ones put on the plate. Again, educational programs, development, and facilities. So once we identify all our student needs, how many students we're going to have, then of course they look to see what programs we may want to bring into the district or continue or change, and then of course, do we have the facilities to support those? We are always looking, as we should. There's, some doing some strategic planning, some planning around what are we looking for in the future. So again, that's part of, as we think about our budget and our 5-year planning, what we also take into consideration. And again, the items that we said are just, 80% of our budget are employees, and of course, what is the cost of the contracts for all of our staff. Here is one of the things, and this is a really critical piece for all schools, and it is actually now a requirement, but it's something that most school districts have always relied on, as you would in any business, is really not only looking at your next year's budget, but of course, thinking about the sustainability, the long-term planning, to the best of all that we can of our 5-year expenditure and revenues. So I share this, we share this, we'll be sharing it with the board when we unpack our budget, because it is very important, because sometimes, there could be a year that you may be able to afford, you think you can afford something, but we also think, okay, well, if we add, this upcoming year or do this, like what are the long-term financial implications of doing so? So as we had earlier mentioned, there's just the cost of doing business. We do have, this is not unlike any business, there are some external drivers to expense that are out of our control. We have some internal drivers that are our contracts. But I would also say that they're internal, but yet there is a marketplace for what people receive in compensation. So much of our budget, even without adding, and this is what we had spoken about much earlier in the presentation, just kind of moving, or just with our enrollment and some of those earlier kind of understanding of children's needs, we're at a $3 million increase year over year, so somewhere in the neighborhood of that. Of course, that does include debt, but that's even before we consider adding anything additional. And then, of course, once we were to do that, it may only seem like one or a smaller cost, but we look at the projection of those costs. So this is not to scare people, right? It's just to show that we're very mindful of it. We want to be thoughtful about everything we do and thoughtful about the impacts, not only for the next year, but for the years out. So again, this chart demonstrates some of that thinking. And of course, there's always some adjustments based on what actually happens. And again, similarly, not only do we look at the expenditure side and where we envision our budget, the growth of that spending plan to be, but we also, on the flip side, we look at the revenue picture and considering, how looking at our expenditure growth, what's the intersection of that, the tax cap, are we going to be short? And on this chart, really the reason you probably can't see it, but for those that may be reviewing these slides tomorrow, on this particular chart for revenue, the reason on the bottom where it'll say revenue shortfalls, because this chart is anticipating that if we were to stay within the tax mandated tax cap, these would be the reductions in the out years we would have to make to balance our budget. So it's looking at what the revenues, the expenditure growth is, looking at a moderate increase in revenues along with staying under the tax cap impact. And you can see in the out years that very quickly, without efficiencies and savings elsewhere, that we would be looking at reductions without adding anything additional. So questions, I don't know. Nobody's here, so.
I can ask you a question.
Sure.
Can you hear me out there? And Patrick, you're my test. So I do know, Maureen, from you did a quite thorough presentation for the board. And early in this document, you flagged, or I guess I did this, was the words, but the major drivers of expenses and the year-to-year budget variances. And I know that our push ahead on the year-to-year budget variances totals about 3.3 million. I mean, roughly, kind of, how would you break these down? Contractual obligations, just rough amounts, so people listening and watching can say, and I'm catching on the fly here, but I know you can recite this, because the reason I'm asking this is often in complex budgets, it's these 6 or 7 major pivot points that help people understand really what's going on.
Right. Yes, so this year, as I earlier mentioned, I'll start actually with the one item on the bottom, because this was a brand-new expenditure line in our budget. So, right off the bat, a little shy of $1 million, 800 or 900,000 or so, of the total 3.3 is the new debt that is coming on the expenditure side of the budget to start paying down that obligation. And then in terms of the breakout of the others, I'll call it, actually, I'm going to group together pension, health increase, and...
You might want to recite it, because we don't have it on the screen.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Sorry.
So the other contractual obligations would be the second largest driver of the expenses. And I believe that, I'm thinking about all the different components, it's probably about $900,000 or so. And again, that speaks to just our current contracts that are in place and what the cost of renewing or just rolling those next year would be. So that's approximately $900,000. And then the pension costs and health insurance, which are all like under the employee benefits section of the budget, we actually were fortunate because the health insurance was relatively low, which we again have to be mindful that may not be every year, but that area of the budget I think was about $400,000, $300,000 or so. And then the remainder of the drivers sometimes are for individual student costs, which when we say programming, it's really individual student needs that would again, this is not debatable. It's like that's the cost for that child for this upcoming school year, and that's the remainder of the cost associated there. So, and then of course, as you know, there were some kind of efficiencies and things like that, and that's kind of how we got to this 3.3. But those within are the bigger, kind of drivers as they represent the biggest portion of our budget.
Okay. Melissa, do you have a question from?
No questions right now.
Okay. All right.
So I know the last couple of years, I think, we've always want to provide some of this background information. We think as we go through the budget, some of it, again, is just technical terms, and we think it's helpful because occasionally we'll be throwing some of those around, and it's a good reference document, I think. And then also just to kind of give you some flavor around some of those other challenges that we have. And we don't want to belabor that because when we're trying to unpack our budget, it's hard for us sometimes to review all of those. But we hope you found this helpful. And we'll be having our upcoming, I'll go to the next slide. We, as we had mentioned earlier, February 7th was the first time, and I will just mention here for anyone who actually may have watched that, from the 7th till this evening, there was a slight variation. Our budget planning it's slightly less, and again, that it is a living document. Again, I don't see it, changing that dramatically between now and the adoption of the budget. But as we had mentioned, when there's some student needs and some things may shift, we will make those adjustments prior to the board adopting the budget. So the budget's slightly lower than we had presented on the 7th. Tonight, again, we did the Budget 101. We'll have, I would say, a much more detailed, longer presentation scheduled for March 7th. And then, again, although the board then adopts the budget on the 19th, we obviously, as in past years, the meetings in between those two dates will certainly be, there'll be a large chunk of time dedicated to the budget, maybe budget discussions, there could be a work session possibly. So I just want to say that although there's not a lot of other detailed presentations, many times we go back and we review and we speak in more detail about what has been presented. And make sure we give not only the board, but the public ample opportunity to come and, ask questions. Any questions that people may have, they can always shoot me an email also. My email's on the website, if there's anything that you would find helpful. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing everybody on March 7th. Well, good evening.
Thank you.